He nailed my door shut. Big mistake. After years of harassment from a slumlord, I hit back with paperwork, patience, and a plan that ruined him. When I moved into the little duplex on Harrow Street, I thought I'd found a hidden gem. It wasn't much. Yellowing vinyl siding, a cracked walkway, and a sagging porch that looked like it had been built during the Cold War, but it was cheap, close to work, and quiet. In the city of Linwood, that's a rare trifecta. I should have known there was a catch. His name was Roy Beringer, and from the moment I met him, I knew something was off. He was one of those landlords who acted like the property was still his personal kingdom. Short, loud, always wearing the same grease-stained windbreaker and shouting into a Bluetooth headset like he was closing stock deals, even though I'm pretty sure the guy didn't own anything besides this rotting duplex and a rusted-out pickup with 3 mismatched tires. Rent's due the 1st. No exceptions. He'd barked at me the day I signed the lease. Don't like rules, don't rent from me. I should have walked away then. But I was desperate, and he knew it. At first, it was small stuff. Annoying, sure, but not illegal. He'd randomly show up and check on the furnace, without warning. Sometimes he'd just let himself in while I was in the shower or asleep. I confronted him once, and he grunted something about routine maintenance. I knew my rights, but I also knew landlords like Roy counted on tenants not having the time or energy to push back. Then things escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find my dryer missing from the shared basement. Gone. Vanished like it never existed. I asked Roy about it and he smirked like he was proud of himself. That dryer was technically in a common area, he said. Means it's community property. If you want to keep stuff secure, you should lock it up. I stared at him, stunned. It was bolted into the wall. He shrugged. Should have bought better bolts. A week later, I received an invoice in the mail, $340 for a plumbing repair. The pipe under the kitchen sink had finally burst after months of groaning and dripping. I'd reported it twice. Roy had ignored me. Now, he was making me pay for what a licensed plumber would later call obvious deterioration from long-term wear and tear. When I refused, he tacked the $340 onto my next rent bill with a $150 late fee. That was the only month I ever paid rent late in the entire 3 years I lived there. He used it as ammunition from then on. Don't make me report another delinquency, he'd say, holding my rent check up like it was evidence in a court case. You want that on your record. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I swallowed my pride. I paid the rent. I told myself I just needed to ride it out until I could afford to move. But Roy wasn't done. When a dispute over parking came up, a ridiculous argument over whether I could park in front of my own unit, he sent me a formal letter stating that if I wanted the spot I'd been using for years, I'd now have to pay an extra $150 per month. I brought it to a lawyer friend. He laughed and told me the letter wasn't even legally binding, but advised me to keep documentation in case Roy retaliated. Which, of course, he did. He began stomping around the property at night, slamming his truck doors, shouting into his phone outside my window. He'd pound on my door at 6 a.m., inspections, and claimed he had the right to enter whenever he wanted. At one point, I caught him trying to force my door open with a screwdriver. That was the first time I called the cops, but they couldn't do much beyond documenting the incident. No damage, no theft, no arrest. Just another report in a system that favors the property owner over the person living inside the walls. Still, I stayed. Because, what else could I do? Moving costs money. Lawyers cost more. And in Linwood's rental market, I knew I was lucky to have a place that hadn't doubled in price yet. But when Roy announced, casually, that he was raising my rent by $500 per month, something in me snapped. He expected me to either fold or move out quietly. Instead, I started planning. The thing about Roy Beringer was that he never saw people as threats, only obstacles. He saw tenants as numbers, wallets, problems to be pressed until they cracked or caved. It worked on a lot of people. He assumed it would work on me too, but I wasn't broken. I was waiting. And when he tried to raise my rent by $500 out of nowhere, that's when it clicked. He had no idea how close I was to walking out forever. He thought I'd beg, or grovel, or argue over scraps. Instead, I smiled, nodded, and told him I'd think about it. He smirked like he'd won. Like he always did. That's when I started planning my exit. Quietly, carefully. I didn't tell friends. I didn't post about it online. I didn't even hint at it to my coworkers. I started packing boxes at night, labeled the ones I needed to stash in storage, started looking for a short-term place to crash while I regrouped. And in the middle of it all, I started making a list. See, most people don't know this, but municipalities like Linwood have housing inspectors who are responsible for enforcing safety codes. They aren't glamorous. They're not out busting down doors. But if you give them a reason to visit, they're obligated to investigate. I had plenty of reasons. A porch that had rotted for 2 years and been replaced without a permit, a gas heater that hissed and leaked and had clearly never been inspected, illegal plumbing that backed up every few weeks and was installed like a DIY YouTube disaster, exposed wiring behind the stove, a bathroom fan that blew air into the attic. Not out of the building. I didn't know which of these were major violations, but I knew some of them had to be. And if even one thing turned out to be a code violation, Roy would start bleeding fines by the day. So I made the call. 4 days before I moved out, I contacted Linwood's Department of Housing Safety. I explained everything, clear, calm, professional. I told them I was a tenant preparing to move, and that I was concerned for the next renter. No rage, no accusations, just facts. The person on the phone paused and asked, "Would you be available for a site visit this week?" Absolutely. The inspector arrived the very next morning. I'll never forget the look on Roy's face when he pulled into the driveway and saw a city vehicle with a housing code badge parked out front. He stopped dead in his tracks, hesitated like he was about to speed off, and then just stood there, arms crossed, glaring at the inspector like a man whose secret lair had just been raided. I stayed out of the way, sipping coffee from my porch as the inspector walked around with a clipboard and a tape measure. He was methodical, quiet. Every so often, he'd mutter something into his phone or jot a note. He spent 20 minutes just examining the porch, another 15 measuring the clearance around the gas heater. He took photos of the bathroom ceiling, the busted tiles in the kitchen, the extension cord Roy had strung across the basement rafters to power a wall-mounted floodlight. I didn't ask questions. I just watched. Later that day, I received an email confirming multiple violations had been noted and filed. The inspector couldn't share details due to policy, but said that follow-up would be handled by enforcement staff. And here's the best part. In Linwood, every violation comes with a $500 per day fine until it's fixed. I don't know how many violations he hit Roy with. I don't know how fast the fines added up. But if even 3 of those issues were legit, that's $1,500 a day bleeding out of his pocket, starting immediately. Multiply that by weeks or months. Roy wouldn't be counting rent hikes. He'd be counting losses. But I wasn't finished. A week before my move-out date, Roy tried to hit me with one last power play. He sent me a text demanding I vacate the unit by 10 a.m. sharp, warning that if I overstayed, he'd involve the police. Which, legally, was nonsense. Where I lived, move-out time defaults to midnight on the final day of your lease unless otherwise agreed upon in writing. And surprise, there was no such clause in my lease. But Roy never let facts get in the way of threats. So I took it a step further. The morning of my move, I drove straight to the police station. I explained the situation calmly and asked them to log my visit. My landlord may try to escalate, I told them. Just wanted to get ahead of it. They took my statement, nodded, made a note. Sure enough, 2 hours later, Roy showed up, livid, posturing, and accusing me of refusing to vacate. I called the police myself. When the officers arrived, they listened, read my lease, and told Roy, in front of me, that I was fully in the right. For the first time in 3 years, I watched Roy's jaw clench shut with no comeback. But the day wasn't over yet. Because while I stepped out to haul boxes into my truck, Roy did something stupid. I had only been gone 20 minutes. Just enough time to run a load of boxes to storage, grab a quick snack, and return with an empty trunk for the final haul. I wasn't even thinking about Roy anymore. Not really. I thought the worst was over. He'd thrown his tantrum, lost face in front of the cops, and probably sulked off to his truck to stew about it. I was ready to finish this move, hand in the keys, and never think about Harrow Street again. But when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. The front door was shut. Locked. Which was odd, because I'd left it open while moving. I'd left it open on purpose because I had boxes stacked in the hallway and needed to go in and out quickly. But now, not only was it shut, it looked wrong. I got out of the car slowly, walked up the porch steps, and that's when I saw it. Nails. Roy had nailed the door shut. Not metaphorically. Not exaggerated. He had taken actual wood screws, drilled them through the doorframe, and sealed me out of my own unit. I stood there in shock. Then I stepped back and looked around. No sign of him. His truck was gone. No shouting, no threats, no smug smile. Just the silence of a man who had done something criminal and vanished before the consequences could catch up. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I called the police. Again. This time, I didn't ask for patrol. I asked for a supervisor. When the dispatcher asked why, I said it clearly. My landlord just broke into my home while I was out and sealed the door shut. I've already filed multiple reports. I'm done being polite. I waited outside while the officers arrived, 2 squad cars this time. When they walked up and saw the state of the door, their expressions changed instantly. No more, it's a civil matter. No more shoulder shrugs. This was breaking and entering. And they knew it. The supervisor showed up 15 minutes later, took photos, logged statements, and then pulled me aside. You said you've been reporting this guy for harassment before. Yes, repeatedly. He's tried to break in before. He's threatened me, raised rent illegally. He's retaliated since I reported him for code violations. The supervisor took it all down. He was calm, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was the moment it crossed the legal line. I want a copy of this police report, I said. And I want to press charges. The officer nodded. We'll be recommending a felony count of breaking and entering. Felony. That word rang in my ears like church bells. Roy had finally gone too far. He couldn't scream his way out of this. Couldn't slap a fee on my rent or wiggle through a lease loophole. He had entered a residence he didn't have legal access to. Locked the door, then fled. And I had witnesses. Photos. Documentation. Prior reports. The perfect paper trail. I watched as the officers worked, snapping more pictures, examining the screws, shaking their heads. Unbelievable, one muttered. This guy's a walking lawsuit. I didn't respond. I was too busy smiling. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore. By the end of the day, I had a full police report in hand. The officer gave me a copy and assured me that charges would be filed. You'll likely be contacted by a detective for a formal statement, he said. And if this goes to court, you're going to want all your documentation. I had it. Every photo. Every receipt. Every copy of the lease. Every complaint I'd filed. Even screenshots of his texts. I had been preparing for a year, and now, finally, the system was catching up. And I wasn't even done yet. Before leaving town, I made one final call. To the town clerk's office. I asked for public records related to building permits on the property at Harrow Street. Turns out, the porch that Roy had repaired last year, the one the inspector had already flagged, had no permit on file, which meant the fines weren't just speculative anymore. They were active, and they would keep stacking, every day, until it was fixed, properly, legally, at his cost. He wanted to make an extra $500 a month off me. Now he was losing $500 a day, and facing a felony charge, all because he couldn't stop himself from pushing just a little further. The thing about people like Roy Beringer is that they never expect to lose. He'd spent years operating like the rules didn't apply to him, like the law was more of a suggestion, and tenants were nothing but short-term annoyances. And for a while, it worked. Most people don't fight back. Most people just leave quietly and try to forget. But I wasn't most people. And I didn't leave quietly. A week after the police report was filed, I got a call from a detective with the Linwood Police Department. She was polite, direct, and very interested in the incident at Harrow Street. I've reviewed the statement from the responding officers, she said, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. Can you walk me through everything that happened, starting from the moment you moved in? I did. I told her about the stolen dryer, the plumbing charges, the illegal rent hikes, the late-night harassment, the break-in attempts, the nails through the door. Every word came out sharper than I expected, like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and was finally exhaling all at once. She didn't interrupt once. Just typed, and typed, and typed. When I finished, she said, "Thank you. This confirms everything we saw at the scene. We're moving forward with the charge." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means Roy Beringer will be served notice to appear in court for felony unlawful entry and criminal mischief. If he fails to appear, a warrant will be issued." I thanked her, hung up, sat in silence for a moment. Then I laughed. Not a loud, manic laugh. Just one of those small, stunned chuckles when you realize the tables have finally turned. He was really going to court. And this time, I wasn't the one being cornered. Meanwhile, word about Roy started spreading around the neighborhood. Tenants talk, especially in tight-knit rental blocks like Harrow Street. I got a message from someone who'd taken over the back unit in the same duplex after another tenant had moved out. "Hey, is it true? He tried to nail your door shut." "Yup," I replied, "and he's getting charged for it." They replied with a simple gif. A slow clap. Apparently, I wasn't the only one with horror stories. The new tenant told me Roy had tried to charge them a $200 move-in sanitization fee for an apartment that still had holes in the drywall and a fridge from the Reagan era. When they refused, he told them they were on thin ice. Classic Roy. But now, tenants had ammunition. If the city was involved, if there were confirmed violations, if he had a criminal record, everything changed. I gave them the contact info for the inspector and the detective. Told them to keep notes, dates, screenshots. Voices don't matter to people like Roy, but paper trails do. That's when I remembered something important. Property records. I went back to the town clerk's office and pulled the full history of complaints filed against Roy's property. Turns out, I wasn't even the first. 3 other tenants had filed reports in the past 5 years, 2 for illegal entries, 1 for unsafe living conditions. But all of them had moved before anything came of it. No follow-up, no enforcement, just paperwork buried in a filing cabinet somewhere, forgotten. Until now. I asked the clerk, "Do these stay active if someone brings fresh evidence?" She nodded. "If there's a pattern, yes. We can reopen previous complaints." I grinned. Reopen them all. Suddenly, Roy wasn't just facing 1 police report and a few daily fines. He was facing 3 years' worth of ignored violations, tied to multiple witnesses, backed by new evidence. Every door he kicked in. Every illegal fee he charged. Every text, voicemail, and half-assed repair. All of it was coming back to collect. And this time, there was nowhere to hide. Roy didn't get arrested the next day. That's the thing most people don't understand about real-life justice. It's slow. It doesn't come with dramatic music or instant karma. It grinds. But oh, when it grinds long enough, it breaks bones. It started with the fines. A neighbor messaged me a few weeks after I moved out, right around the time spring turned into summer. They said a city vehicle had been parked outside the duplex every day for the last 2 weeks. Inspectors, enforcement officers, sometimes 2 at once. "I don't know what you told them," the message read, "but I think you broke him." Every day they came by, they added more to the violation log. Apparently, the porch wasn't just unpermitted, it was structurally unsound. The railing wasn't up to code, and the depth was too shallow by several inches. The gas heater failed its inspection outright. The plumbing, the whole basement needed to be redone. Each violation, $500 a day. Per issue. The last I heard, Roy had racked up more than $50,000 in fines, and they were still stacking. Next came the news from the local housing board. Word had gotten around about the building conditions at 112 Harrow Street. That meant Roy was now flagged on a tenant advocacy watch list, a database shared among local rental groups and student housing centers. You know what happens when you get blacklisted from those. You stop getting new tenants. Vacant units equals no cash flow. No cash flow equals trouble paying for those mounting fines. And once tenants catch wind of an owner under investigation, guess what they do? They stop paying rent. They break leases. They report every creaky floorboard and leaking faucet. Roy's empire, which had run on intimidation and silence for years, was finally coming apart. And all I had to do was tell the truth. But that wasn't the end. A few weeks later, I got a call from the detective handling the case. I thought you might want to know, she said. Roy failed to appear at his initial court date. My heart skipped. Seriously? Yeah, warrant's been issued. We'll see if he gets smart and turns himself in. But if not, she let the sentence hang, heavy with implication. I didn't ask what, if not, meant. I didn't need to. Roy wasn't just some guy who forgot a court date. He'd been running his properties like a back alley operation for years. Once a warrant is issued in a case like that, the police don't just shrug it off. They show up. And Roy, he was nowhere to be found. According to neighbors, he stopped coming by the property altogether. No more truck. No more 6 a.m. stomping. No more shouting into his Bluetooth headset. One tenant told me they watched movers haul out his office furniture 2 weeks after the court date. He was liquidating, vanishing, running. I didn't cheer. I didn't throw a party or post a triumphant thread online. There was nothing cinematic about it. It was just peaceful, quiet. After 3 years of tiptoeing around this man's temper, after being harassed and nickel and dimed and treated like trash, I finally lived in a world where Roy didn't get to win. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore. In the months that followed, I moved into a small, clean place across town. My rent wasn't much higher, but the difference in atmosphere was night and day. The landlord, an older woman named Cheryl, was kind, respectful, and prompt. When I reported a leak under the sink, she had a plumber out the next morning. When I asked about painting one of the rooms, she offered to cover the cost of paint. It felt like I was living in a dream. No threats. No games. No nails in the door. Sometimes I'd drive past Harrow Street, just to see. The grass grew tall. Paint peeled from the porch. A yellow notice was slapped on the front window. Code enforcement violation. Property condemned pending repairs. I didn't need to stop to read it. I already knew what it said. By the time summer turned to fall, I had almost stopped thinking about Roy Beringer. Not because I'd forgotten. How could you forget someone who made your life hell for 3 years? But because I no longer needed to. He was just a chapter now. And I had started a new one. My new apartment was small but warm. The walls didn't flake paint. The ceiling didn't drip brown water when it rained. The heater turned on with the push of a button and didn't make the whole place smell like burning metal. It was, by every metric, ordinary. But to me, it felt like a palace. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch every time someone knocked at the door. I didn't jump when I heard footsteps outside. I didn't dread checking my mailbox for another trumped-up fee or bogus notice. I could breathe. And that's when I realized something. Winning wasn't about the money Roy lost. It wasn't even about the charges or the fines or the city crawling all over his property. Those things mattered, sure. But what truly made it a win was that I got out. On my terms. He didn't evict me. He didn't raise me out. He didn't make me run. I left on my schedule, with my head held high, and he couldn't do a thing about it. And even better. I left behind a trail that made sure he couldn't just do it to the next person. I'd like to say the justice system wrapped everything up with a bow. That Roy was tried, convicted, and fined into the next dimension. But real life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, people like him wriggle through loopholes. Sometimes they settle, or disappear, or start the cycle over somewhere new. But not without scars, because now Roy had a record. He had fines and a reputation. He was on lists, and every tenant who followed me would be armed with that knowledge. That history, that warning. I gave them that. Without yelling. Without vandalism. Without stooping to his level. Just patience, paper trails, and well-timed truth. Funny thing is, people started reaching out to me. Friends of friends who had bad landlords, coworkers dealing with toxic building managers, strangers who had heard about the Harrow Street thing. They wanted to know how I did it. So I started telling them. Not just the steps, call the inspector, document everything, know your rights, but the mindset. I told them what someone had once told me. Bullies like that only win when you stay quiet. You don't need to shout. You just need to write everything down and wait for them to hang themselves with their own rope. I kept a copy of Roy's police report in my files, not because I needed it anymore, but as a reminder. That it's possible to stand up to someone who thinks they're untouchable. That you don't have to be rich, or loud, or connected to win. You just have to be relentless. and smart. And when the time is right, absolutely done being nice. A few months after everything settled, I got an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, Beringer vs. City of Linwood. Resolution notice. I opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even directed at me. It was a public record notification, part of a batch of final notices shared with former complainants. Apparently, Roy had reached a settlement with the city. The terms were brutal. Over $60,000 in fines, a mandatory eviction from all active property ownership in the city for 18 months, court-mandated compliance inspections for any future rental license he attempted to apply for. There was one sentence that stood out. Subject has relinquished deed and maintenance responsibility for 112 Harrow Street. Property to be auctioned by the city of Linwood for remediation costs. He lost the building. I stared at that sentence for a long time. 3 years of noise, harassment, manipulation, gone. Like that. No more Roy banging on doors. No more illegal fees. No more intimidation. Just a condemned shell of a property being sold to cover the damage he'd done to others. To me. And he couldn't stop it. Couldn't talk his way out of it. Couldn't threaten, bluff, or bully anyone anymore. The city had done what I couldn't do alone. Taken everything back. I didn't dance. I didn't cheer. I just closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the weight lift off my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt done. Later that week, I drove past Harrow Street one last time. There were city workers on the porch, prying off the railing, loading debris into a dumpster. The siding had been stripped off, revealing the bare bones underneath. The lawn was fenced in with yellow tape and a big white sign. Condemned. Do not enter, violations pending remediation, property of the city of Linwood. I parked across the street. Just sat there, watching. That place had been my home. My cage. My battleground. And now, it was a monument. Not to Roy's power, but to his downfall. A few minutes later, I saw a couple walking by, pointing at the sign and whispering. I couldn't hear them, but I imagined the story they were trying to piece together. Must have been something really wrong with the place. Wonder what the landlord did. Bet the tenants finally had enough. They were right. We did have enough. And one of us fought back.